Coming up on the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast.
What I was super impressed by, and my perspective started to change on sugars, is that there is very little evidence that sugar causes anything bad. And what I mean by that is there's a ton of research, animal and human, where removing sugar from a diet like causes a weight loss or fixes some kind of problem, or giving animals a bunch of sugar causes a problem. But it's always in the context of at least moderate, if not high fat intake. So I've never found a study where, because if you believe that sugar's bad, then the worst thing would be to have all of your calories from sugar and none from fat. Whenever you do that, though, you see no problems.
Hello, and welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I'm Brian Grin, and I'm here to give you actionable tips to get your body back to what it once was 5, 10, even 15 years ago. Each week, I'll give you an in-depth interview with a health expert from around the world to cut through the fluff and get you long-term sustainable results. This week, I interviewed Kyle Mamounis. Kyle has a PhD in nutritional sciences from Rutgers and is currently performing biochemical research. Kyle has an interesting background of trying almost every diet out there and has formed his opinions based on his self-experimentation and research. We discussed PUFAs versus saturated fats, is sugar really bad for us, the diet that makes mice lean, endotoxemia, and his one tip to get your body back to what it once was. Really enjoyed my interview with Kyle. I know you will too. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. All right, welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. My name is Brian Grin, and on today's show, I have Kyle Mamounis on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. I'm excited to have you on. You've been on a bunch of different podcasts that I keep an eye on, and I'm like, I got to get Kyle on. He's had some great papers that are out there, health researcher. Maybe give the audience just a small background of, what you've been up to and, what type of research you've done over the last few years.
Recently, I haven't been up to really anything in the health world, but I came into it through a personal interest, just being online back in like internet. What was it? 1.0? What's 1.0? Before social media, but
okay.
Like say 2004, 2005, like nutrition forums, people arguing about raw veganism and carnivore all the way back then. So I was so obsessed with that stuff that I changed my major to biology and then went and got a PhD in nutritional, I think it's called nutritional science, whatever my department called the degree, and to do research on this stuff. And over that very long time period, from when I was maybe 19, I started experimenting with vegetarianism. I'm 39 now. So I have been, either online reading and arguing with people about how vegetarianism is better when I was, 20 or something, for like 20 years. And yeah, I guess that's one way to put my background.
So you've been through a few iterations of different diets, and then you became a health researcher because this is something that intrigued you. What different diets did you try, and what are you currently doing?
I did. It's kind of not fair to say, because when I started with regular vegetarianism, I didn't really know anything. So I could probably do a much better version of vegetarianism now than I did then.
Right.
And when I started like the raw vegan diet, this was when David Wolf, who I guess has rebranded himself as like a conspiracy theorist guy,
okay.
or something. And his middle name is now Avocado. Back when he was just David Wolf, the author of a book called Nature's First Law, which I don't know, early 2000s. At the end, the end of every chapter finishes with the same sentence: "Cooked food is poison." So So basically I was like, truly believed that, like all of the vital life force of foods or whatever is in like the raw form. And if you cook it, you kill it, like that kind of thing.
Sure.
So, I did like a raw vegan thing, super skinny. I didn't even know how much calories were in things. So, um, let alone the macronutrients and everything else. And then I started coming into contact with sort of carnivore adjacent ideas online, specifically through Agenas van der Planets, who was the guy who advocated a raw diet, but with animal foods, raw milk, cheese, and meat, honey, just anything that you can eat raw.
Oh, so he was eating raw meat as well.
Yes, and so was I.
Oh,
That was probably my longest diet. That was an extreme diet. I ate most of my calories from raw meat, probably from around 2008 to 2012, 13 maybe. So 4 to 5 years.
wow.
It wasn't 100%. But yeah, my most stable, really weird diet regimen was I was part of a co-op I lived in New Jersey, but close to the Delaware River. So Pennsylvania is right there. And in Pennsylvania, you can sell unpasteurized milk. I think it's only Pennsylvania and California. I haven't checked recently, but at the time, those were the only two states. And there's a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch in Pennsylvania. So they had these co-ops where they would sell milk and then their other farm products to people that would be part of these co-op groups where you would, leave a check or money or whatever. It's actually a really interesting system. I went to this nice lady's house, and there was coolers, and you would open them up and take the stuff that you had ordered out and like leave money, like cash or checks, like
a drug deal.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like shocked that like
you didn't get like arrested.
Yeah, or that like people didn't just take the money. I don't know. It was crazy, but it worked. For years, I was doing this.
So you were buying.
So I would.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You were buying raw milk, unpasteurized
milk
from this lady, leaving money.
Well, from Pennsylvania Dutch farmers, yeah, that would drop it off at her house. And then also bags of beef stew meat, which is like the cheapest cut. So just like, chunks of beef that are like kind of rough cuts that you would generally cook for a long time to soften them up.
Yeah.
And then also bags of pure suet, so the internal fat. And I had a food processor, and I would pulse them together at about a 50-50 ratio. So that would give you like, I don't know, because, fat has more, the meat would be heavier, but the fat has like more than twice the calories per gram. So if you put them together volume wise, about 50-50, you probably get like 70% of the calories from the fat and like 30 from protein or something like that. That was kind of my ballpark estimate. And that was like my normal meal. So I'd do that like twice a day, like just a big bowl of like meat slurry. Wow.
And did you ever get like sick, or did anything happen?
No. Okay. The only time I ever got sick eating anything raw, well, I mean, obviously I don't, like, for all I know, I could have had like a long-term parasite, but I never had, any serious symptoms or anything. I did get acutely sick once when I was pretty early on this diet, and sometimes I would eat random things. So that was when I had a very regimented, which, by the way, if you want to do a weird diet, you should have a system like that where you don't have to think about it. It's kind of like
regimented
factory. Yeah. But so I had like a piece of frozen salmon, just like a salmon fillet, and I let it thaw on a counter, and I kind of just let it sit there for like, I don't know, 8 hours or something. And then I ate it, and I was just hanging out later that night, like watching TV. And I started to like sweat and feel really bad. And then I like barfed, and then I felt okay. So, I mean, I have had food poisoning from eating raw stuff, but I've had food poisoning a lot more times from just like,
right.
It's just random stuff. Right. I mean, so, but yeah, if with the raw meat, most parasites are killed if you freeze it, not all. So if you get like from a good quality and you freeze it, or it's been frozen at some point, and you can kind of look at it and it's not ground, is then like things are introduced, from the outside. Um, there's some techniques that people do to avoid stuff like that, but
And what
I still make tartare once in a while.
Oh, okay. And so you went through the raw stage.
Mm-hmm.
You did raw vegan for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then after that, what happened after the raw stage?
I just started adding more like normal foods. There were kind of two influences, I guess, if you count life, like just social pressures. So I've always been sort of an extreme guy. So I was able to handle like every day somebody being like, "Oh my God, what's in your glass lock container? Is that raw meat?" Like every day. For the first year, it's kind of fun to be like somebody who has an interesting thing. And then after a while, it's like, you just want to be normal.
Yeah.
But the two like intellectual influences were, one, I had started graduate school, a PhD program in nutritional science in the fall of 2012 at Rutgers University. And, I was learning a lot. And, I don't necessarily agree with everything that I was taught there and all that kind of stuff. But, I started to be like, okay, maybe like ketogenesis is like shooting for that all the time, or, burning fat as the preferred fuel sources doesn't have as much slam dunk evidence behind it as I thought from reading these forums for like, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then just about that same time, because I went to the first, it was the fall of 2011, that I started the graduate school, and I went to the first Ancestral Health Symposium, which was this like paleo adjacent kind of conference that people would have. I mean, it's called a symposium. And the first year they had Robert Lustig when he was doing the fructose thing. They had Gary Taubes and people like that, Denise Minger. Mm-hmm. And it was in California. It was at UC Berkeley, I think. And I met Danny Roddy there. And he had just sort of flipped over to the Ray Peat thing. So I started reading Ray's ideas as well. So the combination of that and then just studying sort of like in a regular nutrition program made me it seriously undermined my faith in the current crazy diet I was on, or whatever, not to disparage it, extreme diet I was on, and actually extreme diets in general. So I started adding some pretty normal foods, like the Ray Peat orange juice thing. I started drinking coffee. I never really drank coffee. I even worked at a coffee shop in undergrad, and I still didn't drink coffee. Potatoes, just normal foods. I started cooking meat once in a while, if you can believe that. And yeah, I just sort of transitioned into a pretty normal diet. I would say I have a pretty normal diet now. I do a few things that are sort of influenced from the Ray Peat world. Like I take supplementary collagen. Sometimes I take different vitamin and mineral supplements. I'm not super consistent with a lot of supplements, mostly because I don't notice that many effects. Like I try to take a vitamin E when I eat a fatty meal just to get some vitamin E, but that's not the kind of thing that you feel an acute effect from.
Right.
So it's not like, I have to take this every day or else I feel bad kind of thing.
And in 2017, and I'm staring at it right now, you wrote that publication on the dangers of fat metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps maybe dive into that a little bit and the basis behind that publication.
Yeah, that was the culmination of so I started a project at Rutgers on studying fats, PUFA versus saturated fat. It was a mouse experiment. And I kind of started with more of the carnivore perspective, where saturated fat is good and anything you can find in meat is good, And as I was doing, so a big part of a dissertation is introductory literature review. And in nutritional science, there's a few big questions that have been asked a million times in a million different ways. Things about fat, like high fat diets to cause, obesity or whatever, diabetes type symptoms in animals. Of course, human research as well, clinical. And then carbohydrates, specifically sugar. So to couch my studies in the history of the literature, I'm reading all this stuff and there actually is, it's kind of a toss up in when you read science about fats, like which fats are healthier. It's actually kind of, I don't know. Also animals, like mice, they don't eat a lot of fat. So when you feed them fat, like even if it's the healthiest fat, their outcomes probably aren't similar to ours. But what I was super impressed by, and my perspective started to change on sugars, is that there is very little evidence that sugar causes anything bad. And what I mean by that is there's a ton of research, animal and human, where removing sugar from a diet, like causes a weight loss or fixes some kind of problem, or giving animals a bunch of sugar causes a problem. But it's always in the context of at least moderate, if not high fat intake. So I've never found a study because if you believe that sugar's bad, then the worst thing would be to have all of your calories from sugar and none from fat. Whenever you do that, though, you see no problems. So, and in many cases, a weight loss, situation, sort of like if you cut out sugar. So you're kind of a thing.
So you're saying that everything that's talked about regarding high sugar is also in combination with something that's high fat.
Yeah, high or perhaps moderate fat. So like this is one thing I talked about on some stream with Danny and my buddy Leo. I knew I had remembered this and I wanted to double check, but the animal diet, the mouse diet company that I use, Research Diets, it's in New Brunswick or North Brunswick, right next to Rutgers. And it's like the biggest animal diet producer in the world. And even its competitors use the same formula. So it's like the gold standard. And their control synthetic diet. So you can just buy like a control mouse chow, but it's not, you don't know exactly what's in it. It's like, it's either, 12 to 17% this, that kind of thing. But the one that's like put together with exact measurements, it's like 70% carb and like 15% protein or something. And then like 15% fat, something like that. It's overwhelmingly carbohydrate. And half of the calories is just from sugar, like sucrose. And this is the control diet that you use to compare to a diet that might make an animal fat. So the control diet that keeps mice lean, like all around the world, in labs all over the world, is a diet that 35% of the calories come from table sugar and another 35% come from starch. And then the remaining is mixed, I think, casein, milk protein for the protein, and depending on the source, like lard or whatever kind of, probably a vegetable oil for the fat. So yeah, that's
okay. From you're saying from like the gold standard when it comes to doing these tests, these animals are being, for the baseline, to, let's just say, for maintenance purposes, they're being fed 70% carbs, half of that coming from sucrose, the other half coming from starch. And that's like, and then so they're taking that as the baseline, and then they're altering the macronutrient content to see how this affects the animals.
Yeah, or you would give the animal a drug and just have a standard diet so that it's like, you just put in your methods like we use this standard diet, so there's no question about, But what my point is, and what really culminated in the like, what exactly is the evidence that sugar is some sort of super causative agent in problems? And people could say, oh, well, that's mice, it doesn't matter. Well, okay, then they shouldn't use animal studies either. But if we're going to consider animal studies, mice all over the world, if sugar, I mean, 35% is a lot. That's over a third, right? Of their calories is coming from table sugar. If that was extremely obesogenic in animals, then all of those mice would, they'd have to be getting fat, and they're not. So, we could say that's different for humans, but I have yet to see a human study where they, have a low fat diet. Like, say, for a human, low fat would be, I don't know, less, like 15% or less of calories. That's pretty hard to do.
Yeah.
If you've ever tried to count calories and macros and stuff, like, you can't put full fat milk in your coffee, kind of thing. So that kind of a thing, or even zero fat. I mean, if we were going to be really rigorous about it, and then replicate that sort of diet. So most of the cow, have like a however many grams of protein per body weight, and then figure out the calories from that, and then the rest is carbs, and like half of it from sugar. That I don't think that's been done. I found there's this one really old paper where it was done to one guy who was a lab assistant in the Burrs lab. I think Burrs, the people who discovered the essential fatty acids. So they put him on a fat-free diet because they were trying to induce essential fatty acid deficiency in humans, and they couldn't. It was just one guy, a healthy guy in his 20s. But they just fed him a bunch of like defatted milk, all kinds of bread products they were able to make without fat, fruit, stuff like that, just pure sugar. And he lost weight. It talks about all these like positive outcomes he had. Blood pressure went down. So yeah, if sugar is so what I went through with and criticized at first with that paper the idea that burning fat is necessarily better, because I don't see a lot of evidence for that like perspective that it's better than burning carbs. And then the following year I had a follow-up talk about the sugar side of it. Like, does sugar cause problems? And I was also going to make that into a paper, because they asked the people who give talks there. That's what that original paper was it's called an extended abstract. So my talk condensed into a written form. And it didn't work out on the second one because they kept they just didn't want to publish it. I actually saved the email correspondence, and one day I still have the document. Maybe I'll try to get it published somewhere else, and then have like a little thing where it's like, it wasn't up to the standards of now defunct Journal of Evolutionary, whatever that journal was called, but it was up to the standards of this real journal.
So I guess if sugar is not to blame, what is to blame? And is the reason you think sugar is being blamed is because it's being combined with something that's also high fat and highly palatable, and just you just end up overeating it?
Yeah. There's all these different specializations that people do with nutrition, like the hyperpalatable. That's like one topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the less physical activity, both exercise and non-exercise. People just burn less calories. Food availability, caloric availability, and that it's higher. Endocrine disrupting compounds. These are all topics that people do research on from the perspective that this is the cause of the obesity epidemic. And it's kind of like there's a bit of an embarrassment of riches there. Like, you can't have 10 causes for one thing. Mm-hmm. So my perspective is that depending on your personal genetics and lifestyle, and yeah, what your diet is. Like different people, some people probably don't do as well on like a high sugar diet or a high fat diet as other people. But yeah, there's probably components of all of those things. Like some people, if they just exercised more, and I've seen this with people. Sometimes, if some people they're overweight, they pick up a exercise routine and don't change anything else, and things just fall into place for them. And I've seen other people that do the exact same thing, and they don't really make that much of a dent in their weight. And the same thing with changing diets. You know, you can there if you've ever like worked with people or really talked to a lot of people, people that you can kind of verify are real, that have changed diets, you know, you'll find people that just change one thing or do something specific and fix some sort of problem or drop a bunch of weight, and other people that do the same change and it doesn't work for them. So yeah, I don't think there's really like the obesity epidemic is not, to me, it's not a physiological thing that's happening. It's like it's a way of talking about something that is probably has different causes for different people. Like it's, you know, it's not that, oh, we don't exercise as much and that's why the average BMI is up by X percent. I don't think that's the way to think about it.
Well, I think as a society, we want to point to one thing and just blame that. And it, you know, it's like a little bit what's been going on as you talk a lot about. It's just like the blame on carbohydrates as the issue. And so everyone's like, okay, you got to go low carb, got to go no carb. I mean, I've introduced more carbs into my diet just from, you know, research and just from interviewing different individuals like yourself or Danny Roddy or Jay Feldman and things like that. And it's interesting. You know, I've introduced more meals, more carbs, and my weight actually ended up going up a little bit, but then came right back to normal. And it's the same as it was when I was doing fasting and low carb. So, you know, I'm not saying everyone's like that, but I think we do want to just point to one thing. And, you know, fat burning sounds like nowadays, it's like, you know, sexy, right? Sounds right. And I think it's and when I was following it, I thought that would be the right thing to do. What would be some of the pros and cons of fat burning versus glucose burning and becoming, you know, efficient at either one or both?
So the biggest problem that I see with humans, it's just this human problem, and there's no way around it, which is that we have a system that probably for evolutionary reasons appears to be set up such that when our bodies perceive a lack of glucose, it is perceived almost identically to just a lack of calories in general. So the same kind of hormones that would release fat stores if you were fasting or indeed starving are called upon when you are just not eating carbs. And that's kind of the first question one could ask. And there's a slew of, so you can take that, the road forks there, and you can have people that say, well, therefore that's good. Like, well, therefore we're supposed to have, you know, spikes in cortisol or these different types of hormones. They're not stress hormones, they're maintenance hormones or whatever. Who's that? Amber O'Hearn. Do you know her? She does carnivore content, and she does the most unapologetic carnivore content, and I actually really appreciate it because she just goes full, like, yes, whatever stress hormone or whatever you want to call it that is activated from not consuming carbs, that is good. You know, it's good to have high cortisol or whatever. And then there's another camp that says, oh, well, you know, the cortisol sort of normalizes after a while, or there's different hormonal profiles that people can have on these high fat diets. But ultimately, I mean, in order to get fatty acids out of fat cells, these hormonal cascades do have to be in operation. So that, you know, it doesn't always translate to, like, if you do a spit test for cortisol, it can just, your cortisol goes up and down during the day at different times. It's not necessarily going to correlate, but something is activating lipolytic proteins to release fatty acids from cells, and the biochemistry of that is pretty clear, and it's the same thing as if you were in a starvation mode. So beyond just saying this is what happens when your body's burning fat or carbs, which I think I framed that paper that way, is getting into that state of burning fat, to me, just seems like and this is not true for every animal, but for humans, it seems like it's a stressful state, and it seems like we're set up to try to avoid it.
It's almost like a backup.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. Now, people, there's a lot of, you could have a different perspective and say, well, in a world where there aren't carbs available, it was the primary system. And then you can get into a lot of very difficult to answer questions about anthropology. They're always, oh, look, we found another thing that looks like it was used to grind up grains 50,000 years ago or something, things like that, where people will argue about how much carbohydrate was in the diet of this or that prehistoric population. That is that's very dicey, I think, dicey territory. There's modern day hunter-gatherers, and they seek out, honey and fruit whenever possible. So yeah, to me, it seems like, maybe if your background is Inuit, you might be more, in fact, definitely are more adapted to a lower carb diet. But I also don't think, 50,000, it's actually kind of ridiculous that, you can change the genetics and, of course, epigenetics of a population in just a few generations. If the environmental change is strong enough. So if you have the invention of grain agriculture, even if it was only 10,000 years ago, the amount of wars, and if you couldn't digest grains, you're probably not going to reproduce very well in, like, Egypt or whatever. So I'm pretty confident that people can and do metabolize glucose in a way that's fairly, I don't think we need like 100,000-year-old caveman with a packet of sugar or whatever. So yeah, it seems like it's a backup system, and that's really what I think is the problem, because when the actual substrates get into the mitochondria, so after all the hormones are done opening up the doors for these different things, whether it's glucose or fatty acids or whatever, ultimately the carbons and the oxygens and the hydrogens releasing their energy are not so different. So it's really like the differences are, I would say, the biggest, the furthest away. So when your body is first like, oh no, low blood sugar, time to, open up the fat reserves. That's where I see the biggest problem. And then the actual burning of the fuels in real time, whatever. I think ketones probably a great fuel. I don't think there's anything particularly damaging about using them. It just seems stressful to produce them.
So you're talking about, lowering insulin will increase glucagon, right, and cortisol and catecholamines, and put you into a stressful state. And this is and this is just more of a survival mechanism for your body.
And I really haven't written on this for a while, but when you follow all of the things that happen, like, for example, thyroid hormone and just your metabolic rate in general is sensitive to not just calories, but carbs. The liver that converts a lot of thyroxine into active thyroid hormone is that process is turned up and down by both just energy amount and by carbs. So, and if you think of, a hormone like thyroid, or the sex steroids or whatever as like a sort of basal master regulator of just the overall body metabolism, I think the hormone profile of burning carbohydrate as sort of your majority energy source, it looks a little bit better as well. And it looks like if you're trying to spare thyroid hormone, then you're trying to spare, look, that's what happens when you're fasting and when you don't have food.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to fasting, it's something that I promoted for a long time, and I did. I will say that I think it can play a role in individuals' lives because I always like to say it can give an individual structure to their day and to when and when they're eating per se. Like if you're eating late into the evening, it's not going to play a positive role in probably sleep and digestion and things like that. So I like to use it almost as like a bumper on each side of the day where you don't need to take a bite of food the second you get up, and you probably should be waiting, eating your last meal, let's say 3 hours before you go to sleep. But between those two things, in the middle of the day, I think I think a lot of it depends maybe genetically, what's worked for you in the past, and also your activity level.
Yeah, I'm pretty impressed with what they came up with by, say, the 18th or 19th century, the sort of 3 meals a day thing. I'm actually pretty impressed with that. I think, people on both sides, you've got people, oh, you need to, like, I guess the bodybuilder culture, 6 meals a day or whatever. And
right.
If that's, maybe that's if you're trying to like gain, bulk,
right,
you might have to do that. But, and then, of course, on the other side, there's the fasting culture or the 1 meal a day culture. People are always criticizing. I'm pretty, I think 3 meals a day is like a really good discovery that was made, in the dawn of the scientific era.
Was it the food companies? I mean, the food companies discovered snacking. I know that, or a lot of these companies, right?
Snacking used to be, because one of my professors was from England, and he always talked about that he worked in the lab of Hans Krebs, the guy that discovered the citric acid cycle. And when he was growing up as a boy in England, you would get, he made this joke because eating more smaller meals was getting popular. Papers coming out like, oh, if you eat this in between meals, I don't know, whatever, like blunt insulin spikes or satiety, blah, blah, blah. And he was just laughing because he was like, when I was a kid, you would get in trouble for doing that. It was called snacking.
Mm-hmm.
It was against the rules. So these things have changed drastically, both at the level of culture and even of the science. Because I'm sure there was science back then to support not snacking. And now, who's to say if the science supporting snacking is better? I mean,
yeah. I think you could probably take a little bit of everything. I mean, 3 meals a day, I think is probably a good way to go, as long as you're eating things that are like satiating. And maybe that's the big criticism of sugar is you're not getting, maybe it's efficient for you to burn it. But are you getting any nutrients from it? What I know you're into Ray Peat stuff. I don't know if you're still into it as much now, but you mentioned coffee and orange juice. What were the basis behind Ray Peat and what he talked about with like coffee and orange juice?
Yeah, he has like almost a mystical relationship with some of these foods, or at least I guess people imputed that on the internet. But coffee, he would describe as the closest thing that you could come dietarily to a thyroid-like action on the body. So, increase your metabolism. Of course, anybody who's ever done like a professional bodybuilding or fitness cut knows that caffeine is in
everything
products to cut weight if you're, really cranking your body like that, which is not healthy. But
right.
If you have to get to like stage, some type of competition where you have to be like, 8% body fat is kind of fat.
Mm-hmm. And aspirin, he talks about aspirin quite a bit too.
Yeah. So the orange juice, I think he just thinks it's a good source of calories. It has potassium, and there's something about like ripe oranges, he says, and if they're strained, that it does lower endotoxin, postprandial endotoxin, for whatever reason. I don't know. I guess he just thought it was just a very neutral source of calories and some minerals from the oranges. The aspirin, that I actually pretty much agree with. It blocks the production of some of the prostaglandins, and
he's written pretty extensively on aspirin.
Yeah. So one of the main potential ways that having maybe too much of the omega-6 fatty acids floating around could be a problem is that we have a lot of enzymes that make them into other things, like endocannabinoids or eicosanoids. And some of those, the literature is a little weird because it's like, oh, these ones, these prostaglandins or these thromboxanes or whatever are inflammatory, and these ones resolve inflammation. Oftentimes the same one is in both categories. It both isn't, present at high levels at the initiation of an inflammatory event and at the resolution of it. So the way, it's kind of confusing to talk about this, but if you think of our system as having a basic fatty acid profile from historical diet and how that diet has changed to have, for example, more of the omega-6 fatty acids, and we have the same amount of enzymes that deal with them, then you can imagine that there's probably just sort of excess of those eicosanoids floating around, especially if you have some type of inflammatory environment in your body. And aspirin it basically blocks that conversion as its main effect.
All right, Kyle, is there anything else that we want to hit on?
How about gut?
Yeah.
So having gone through all these diets, I'm actually not too I'm not too stuck either way on, like, what we know, as you said, you added carbs back and you gained a little bit of weight and then it went back to normal or to what it was before, things like that. The same thing more or less happened to me. I did go through this. I think I was like 165 pounds or something. And then I became influenced by Ray Pete. And then one day I stepped on a scale at my cousin's house because I didn't have one at my house. And I was like, I gained over 10 pounds. And I was like, oh my God. But my clothes actually didn't fit that much differently. And then months go by, I still didn't have a scale. And then I entered a jiu-jitsu competition. So I had to weigh myself. And I was like 167. So this was, I was not like really good at eyeballing what was going on with my weight. And, some people just gain and lose like 10 pounds and not notice it. So I was in that kind of mindset with my life. So that did happen to me. And then I went on an extended period where I was just slamming tons of ice cream and I gained more weight. And I noticed it was fat because my clothes did fit differently. And I actually had to try to lose that weight. So yeah, I don't think people should do like the internet meme version of the Ray Pete diet necessarily and just eat a bunch of sugar or ice cream or whatever. But as far as chronic health problems are concerned, I think that's probably the biggest source of possibly the obesity thing, but I think more so the metabolic side, like the insulin resistance situation, and a lot of different inflammatory chronic conditions, is probably lipopolysaccharide endotoxin from bacteria. And it's very unfortunate that saturated fats, for reasons of chemistry, are much more efficient at ushering them across the enterocytes. So in other words, if you have a population of endotoxin producing bacteria in your gut and you eat a meal of saturated fat, more of the endotoxin that they have shed will make its way into your system. So I think this is probably one of the reasons for why really low fat diets seem to help people. And also cutting out carbs, because if you get rid of sugars, you probably knock down those populations. Maybe shuffle them around or whatever it is, right? So it's like one or the other way of kind of decreasing this particularly harmful molecule.
Is there a way to know if you have this endotoxemia?
I wish. There's you can test for it as a science. Like there's one of the things that convinced me this was such a common problem is anytime I would read a paper that had it as a test, like for example, heart disease research, whenever they tested the people who had heart disease, those people had pretty bad postprandial endotoxemia. So after a meal, they would have quite elevated levels in their blood of endotoxin compared to just whatever the average is, which is never nothing, by the way. So it's like this constant assault on your body. And yeah, I'm not aware of any kind of commercial or even, private personal medical doctor test for that. I've only seen it in the context of research, which is very annoying because as somebody who is interested in people being healthy, there are things like I used to be like a total libertarian about health stuff. And I was like, oh, people should just be able to buy any drug they want at any store, So not to be that extreme or anything, but I do think tests like like if you could just do a blood test, after a meal for something like that, for something that is so obviously causes problems to so many people, I think that should be available. And, all these other, there's a lot of tests that are done that don't give as quality information. So I find that very annoying, but no, as far as I know, maybe there's some people with like super great sources of really weird tests online, where you send your blood in and stuff like that are aware of them. But I am not.
I'm actually going through a certification through functional diagnostic nutrition, and there's quite a bit of testing. Some of it's saliva, blood, even feces, stool. So, there's definitely some cool testing out there. What would you say for endotoxemia, some of the biggest culprits, and maybe what some things people can do? I know that Ray P talks about the carrot salad and helping with gut motility, and that might be the reason why he likes coffee as well, because it can help obviously make you regular.
Yeah. That's a really tough question because I think that the individual responses to diet and how it works in your gut is probably pretty divergent. Like, one way to know this, I think, is if you see a question of research flipping back and forth a lot. So for example, I don't know, you've probably seen, ever since I was a kid, I remember like, bran muffins, bran muffins prevent colon cancer. And then next year, bran muffins don't, do nothing to prevent colon cancer. And it's just always flip-flopping. Or like the eggs, cholesterol and heart disease or whatever. Oh, eggs cause heart disease. Oh, no, they don't cause heart disease. So to me, from my perspective, when you see something like that happening where it's flipping back and forth, you're just seeing it's like a epistemological confusion about what they're asking. What they're doing is just kind of like there's enough of X type of responder in this one group, and they don't actually know how to weed out for that because it's just a bunch of factors like genetic or otherwise that are just unknowable at this point in time. And then in the next study, they have Y responders, up to an amount where you get a different result. And it's kind of, If that just happened once, obviously, but if it's like something that you keep seeing opposing studies, this and that, and this and that, then I think it's a problem of not understanding what the question you're even asking and not being able to create groups. Because yeah, some people have really great gut motility and don't have any symptoms, GI symptoms on a higher fiber diet. Whereas, especially in the repeat world, a lot of people will experiment with just cutting out fiber, or the carnivore world, and have some type of negative symptom reduction. They had something before. So I don't know. But what you should do is you should never, you should certainly, like, being constipated and having, to the extent that you can perceive it, like a really slow gut motility is never good.
Yeah.
So whatever you have to do, not like pharmaceutically, obviously, but whatever, if you've noticed that your gut feels better on a certain diet, that's something to pay attention to, even if you think that food for some other reason isn't that good. Like you were just reading things like this food is bad, but your personal experience is that, you should pay attention to a few things like that. Things like your gut function, sleep, ability and quality, things like that should never be ignored in the face of like an idea that you have about what's a healthy diet. When you change, like if you change and those things specifically, those kinds of like basic function things get worse, really, really think twice about that.
Yeah. I think now that I'm in like the health world, I'm super aware of that. But back when I was like in high school, I remember having days where I'd have literally like 3 bowls of cereal per day. It was like my main meal as my main meal. And I remember after a while, like I was just getting a lot of gas and bloating. And once I finally realized that I probably should be eating cereal 3 times a day and stuff like that, like Frosted Flakes and stuff. I mean, that this was a long time ago, but like now I'm super like sensitive and aware of like how I react to foods. And again, if it's a one-off, it's not the biggest deal. But if you're noticing over and over again, this is causing some type of issue, gas, bloating, or even just causing constipation, probably something's going on there. So, it's like, I think that's why, like you said, some people have success in like a carnivore diet, because it's like almost the ultimate elimination diet, where they're getting rid of a lot of these gut stressors, and getting relief, and maybe some endotoxin relief as well from their gut. And so they're getting, great results. And this could be something that they could do for a while, and then maybe reintroduce certain foods at some point.
Yeah. And I think like elimination diet type stuff, I think is fine. But like just my personal perspective is that one should aim for being able to eat most normal foods. I think that would be a sign of health. I don't think it's a sign of health to have a really big negative reaction to a lot of commonly eaten foods. If you have certain things that you can't eat them. But I don't think it should be a goal, to be on a very restrictive diet. I think that in and of itself, kind of almost is like a self-fulfilling lifestyle where like you cut things out and it's hard to go back to them. And you kind of don't have a lot of latitude lifestyle wise. Like when I was on weird diets, I didn't really, I centered my life so much about it, if I go on a vacation somewhere, where am I going to get my specifically Pennsylvania Dutch raw milk or whatever meat thing I was doing?
Yeah. Can't go many places probably.
Yeah. And it's just, if it was true that any specific diet, some very specific diet, just got rid of all of your disease risk and made you live twice as long and perform super high, it would probably be worth it, to be really obsessive compulsive about it. But at least my experience and my understanding of the literature is that that's probably not the situation. You can probably tweak things for yourself, in a positive way a little bit, like 10-15% here and there, but cutting out something or adding something or whatever isn't going to make you live twice as long, most likely.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, if you have flexibility as far as eating things that you want, and then you can have a variety in your diet that shows that, you probably have a healthy gut microbiome, as opposed to just always trying to restrict and cut out everything. Maybe initially, but not long term. Well, as we're getting towards the end, a question that I ask all my guests are, if you were going to give one tip to an individual that was looking to get their body back to what it once was 10, 15 years ago, what one tip would you give that individual?
Ooh, 10, 15 years ago. So we're talking about.
So how old are you? 37? No, you're 39.
39. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say we're getting back to like you're 25 years old.
Well, I mean, I have specific issues from like a lifetime of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, but so I would actually sort of give like if it's a person like that, I would give like exercise. Like I've changed how I work out almost completely. Like I focus on like joint health, and watching stuff like that. What's it called? Squat University. Do you know that YouTube channel?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's like stuff like that. Because when you're younger, I mean, this is gonna sound like an old person, but
yeah, I know what you're. Yeah, I think I know what you're gonna say. Trust me, I'm in that industry. When you're younger, you could probably get away with a lot, right? As opposed to,
and you're not like you don't necessarily. It's really hard to care. It's a very unfortunate thing about life, but if you were to just do little things like pay attention to, squat form or something, especially if you're lifting heavy, or if you're doing wrestling and grappling, and just thinking about how your knees and ankles are moving and doing things correctly, even though you can just do something explosively and it doesn't hurt that day.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to keep that in mind. And then sometimes by the time, so yeah, for somebody to get back how their body was, you have to put in basically more effort to get there. So if you want to get back to a certain type of like athletic performance, then you have to put in, I don't know, like 2 or 3 times as much preparatory work, like warming up. And as far as overall health and stuff, like you just have to multiply. You might have been able to eat X diet and be lean and feel good most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you should sort of have to just be more picky about that kind of stuff. But it's so individual,
Yeah. No,
but hey, give the carrot a try. Give
the carrot.
Give the raw carrot a try.
Yeah, I mean, when you're younger, you can definitely get away with more. But I think when you get older, like you said, you have to be more mindful of what you're doing. And you're 39, I'm 43. Yeah, my introduction or getting into my workouts are different as they were when you're 20. You could just start bench, doing whatever, no warm up. But definitely now, I'm a big golfer. Tiger Woods would talk about he'd have a tee time at 6:30. He'd be up at 4, starting like all his like physio work and getting the body prepped and ready to go. And recovery also takes longer when you're a little bit older. So I think if you're mindful of having your days off and just how you're feeling, as opposed to when you're younger, you probably don't need as much recovery time. But recovery is just as important as the actual workout. So
yeah, and you're not really getting away with it, by the way. Like I have a lower back injury that I gave myself when I first started lifting when I was younger, and I'm more aware of it now. Mm-hmm. But I know that I caused it then, and I could feel it back when I was like 17 or whatever. And also I had a tendon tear and I had an MRI for it before reattachment surgery. And they just found a shoulder tear just as an incidental finding.
Oh, wow.
That I'm sure that I got doing jujitsu and not tapping, from different shoulder submissions. And I thought I was getting away with it, right? Like, because I always had like flexible shoulders, and it's like, oh, I'm getting away with this. I can get away with this. Well, maybe you're not getting away with it. Maybe you should actually just be responsible.
Yeah.
But it's very, humans, they react to like what hurts in the moment,
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, Kyle, thanks for coming on, sharing all the knowledge. Best place for people to find you? Are you putting content out there?
I've taken a break since moving and doing a different, working in a different lab. I think my last video, so I have a YouTube channel, Nutrichronology.
Okay.
NUTRICRINOLOGY. The last video I was probably like last October or November.
Okay.
But yeah, I will someday
get back into it. Yeah. I hear you. Well, I appreciate it, Kyle. And enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I understand there are millions of other podcasts out there, and you've chosen to listen to mine, and I appreciate that. Check out the show notes at briangrin.com for everything that was mentioned in this episode. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend or family member that's looking to get their body back to what it once was. Thanks again, and have a great day.